Welcome to Salcedo Paranormal. By the time you hear this, it will be Thursday, March 23rd, 2023, and this is another special roundtable edition of the show. As always, you can find all the episodes of the show along with links to social media and other ways to contact me at the podcast page, and that is salcidoparanormal.podbean.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.podbean.com. Always happy to hear from you all, whether you have comments or questions or topic suggestions or stories of paranormal experiences, whether they're your own or from others that you trust. Happy to either read those on the show or have you join me to talk about them. And also, if you would like to support the show, you can always share it with anyone you think might be interested in it, and or you can check out my paranormal fiction and nonfiction books on Amazon, and or check out the donation links that I will include in the episode description for the show, both on the podcast and YouTube feeds. So, and we can go from there. So, I want to welcome my couple friends here that one has been on one of these before, the other has not yet. This is their first time, but I'll go with we'll start with Jennifer Hawkins. Welcome.
It's good to be here, James. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no problem. Glad to have you on the show again. And of course, we have Michael Strange. I don't know who that guy is.
This guy. What's up, folks? Thanks for having me, James. I've been looking forward to this one. We had this plan for a little while, and I want to say thank you to both Jen and James for being flexible with the times and stuff, because it's been a wild month for me, and I'm sure some of you guys have had some things to juggle as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I really enjoyed doing these monthly roundtable shows, and so I was talking with Jen and Mike about a topic, and something that comes up in a lot of experience or stories as far as encounters. And just in folklore, all over the place in folklore, is the Fae. And just the folklore, and then of course the modern day sightings, and what is going on out there with all these different types of Fae, from what I found here in a little bit of research I did. So, but I know that I think out of all of us, probably Jen, seems like you've done the most research into all this before we started this show. So
No, I think we all have, it looks like.
Yeah.
Because everything I hear from many of the accounts that you have, that every story that you've brought up, and things that Mike talks about on his show, a lot of it to me, and maybe it's just, my own work about it, but that it is talking, a lot of these supernatural experiences could be attributed to the fairy.
Right. Yeah. So many figures, different sizes, but all seeming to be, in most cases, at least a little bit smaller than usual people. But they all seem to have these abilities to do different things that regular people normally can't do. So that's why I wanted to talk about this. So. Yeah, I guess we could start with maybe some of the lore behind all this. I did a little bit of research myself as well, and so apparently the Fae are magical entities that have appeared in critical junctures in one's life, and this is a point that has come up in a lot of shows I listen to, where paranormal events sometimes happen at important times in a person's life. Not always, but that is a common thing. And they live in areas where are sort of on the edges of places, whether it's forests, edges of forests, or even near water, because water, of course, seems to be always present in a lot of these things. And there's some that live in those places in nature, but there's also others that appear in, especially in people's experiences. They appear in homes and buildings and just all kinds of areas, which I think is an amazing thing. It makes you wonder, did they start out in more of nature and then just sort of along with, I guess, civilizations start to move in as the civilizations start to get bigger?
Right. It looks like, well, from what I've kind of gleamed about, because what I think about when I'm thinking about these fairy is that this fairy realm is it's something to do with, it's called lots of things. I mean, it's been referred to as the other world, the underworld, Hades, fairyland. You have all these references to another world that's on parallel with this world that we're in. But there's also this there's this thing going on where it seems in a lot of the old accounts, which the oldest account that I could find written is going back to a book, and the book, I have written it down. It's Robert Kirk, and he was a minister and a folklorist, and he lived from 1644 to 1692, and he wrote a book, and it was called The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies. But it wasn't published until 1815. But that book is available online, and people can read it. It's written in Old English, so it's kind of hard to understand, but you can kind of gather what it's saying, and it's very interesting work. But the accounts about these beings, it's across the entire earth. It's in every single culture, because it seems like these beings were connected with different directions and certain lands, specifically certain cultures, and even the idea of the you have like totem and a tutelary, I think it's the right way you'd pronounce it, spirits, which is like a guardian spirit over certain areas. And so they would have and even over certain bloodlines. But these don't seem to just they're not just quite like spirits. Like this realm it's almost as if it was like that it says in a lot of these stories that mankind and these beings at one time in the history of the earth were living together. They were cohabitating it in a way. But that the earth itself was some type of different substance. And it's as if matter came into being and became more and more solid, or that certain laws of physics began to shift. Like we have accounts of the giants and things like this. Sorry, I have a window of kind of
No
getting
problem.
hot. Anyway, but they have these accounts where it's as if, well, like the Tuatha De Danann, the accounts of, well, because a lot of the fairy lore we're getting is coming out of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the whole of Great Britain and Europe. But that's not exclusively, the Celtic fairy lore is not exclusively to that area, because they're calling them different things in different regions. And they have different descriptions for them, but they all are located in a world parallel to this one. They all, like the accounts of the jinn and the accounts of the fallen angels and the angels, there's a lot of similarity in demons. There's a lot of similarity with this, and they are all there's variations of them, but the Seelie court and the unseelie court, and that they have a hierarchy of, like a system of law in a way. And they seem to have, people have heard a lot about the oath taking with the Fae folk. And I did some research too, and I've heard people say that the word fairy, that the spelling, even like fairy is a more modern spelling, the Fairy. And then you have the one that's kind of in vogue now, because it's the older, archaic version of the word, Fae, the Fae. But they link it to the term, the fates, basically, in Latin, referencing destiny. But they also are talking about, and the idea that these fairy had some type of role to play in the destiny of mankind. They could affect it, and they were working from this world. But they fight wars with man, too. There's accounts of them possessing. In fact, in Scandinavia, there's the Huldra And the Huldra can possess people. However, children and people of pure heart can see them and can't be tricked or led astray by them. But so you have the Tuatha De Danann, even some say that actually it was fought by mortal men, possessed by the Fae, who were the original inhabitants of that territory, that island. Because that island, in the case of Ireland, was fought for many times, as we've heard about. But yeah, so we have the accounts all over the world that the space that we're occupying is also occupied by these camouflaged, invisible, something like invisible, like a different type of air, and the world is overlapping ours, and they are in it, and that they can see us, but we can't usually see them. And I've heard this account too about people talking about angels. So it's very strange. Like they say that children can see them, but adults can't, but angels can see through the eyes of humans. And this is the same thing with fairies. So it's very strange that you see the story all over the earth. And I think they're still with us today. Even in the cases of, for example, Men in Black, and you have and many of the poltergeist experience remind me of the fairy accounts of the past.
Yeah, just the aspect of the children only being able to see these different beings, whether it's it reminds me in the way also of how it's said that children can see spirits a lot easier, just the paranormal in general a lot easier than adults can. So that's that doesn't surprise me. That's an extra little piece of maybe to support that idea, and I believe that. So many of the stories I find when I find them for the shows, they say this happened when I was a kid, 5 years old or 10 years old, and then as the older they get, and as far as the age that the experience took place, the less frequent it is. But it's still there. But there's so many kid stories out there about all kinds of paranormal things.
The
Yeah,
Lost
so of course
Boys.
you have the alien stuff. Like Mike knows a lot about the UFO stuff, but the abduction accounts, it's strange it's very similar to the changeling mythos. But yeah, so it is a big topic, and I think it's more important than ever right now in this time and age, because we may be encountering it in many different ways. I think with the AI and stuff like that Mike talks a great deal about on his show. But there's a possibility we could be communicating still to this day with these, because they're incredibly intelligent, far superior intelligence, supposedly, than a human being. And they can teach us that, so they say.
That's a
For good or bad.
Yeah, that's an interesting connection there. Mike, if you want to go off of any of that.
Yeah, the AI stuff is wild because as we've been talking about this quite a bit on Troubled Minds, there's this, it's like that Ouija board, like that digital version of that, where we're contacting something that these developers of these new chat programs, GPT and Google Bard and everything else that's coming out, they kind of don't really get where this information's coming from. So we're almost channeling another realm by bringing in certain queries and prompts into this space, this latent space, as if you've been listening at all to some of the things that we've been saying on the Troubled Mind show. But it is odd to me that it's possible that we are maybe tapping into some other world. And that's, interestingly, like Jen said when we started here, that's one of the terms for where the Fae folk reside. It's called the other world, one word. And to me, like, I love this because it so much fits with so much, again, the jinn, the fallen angels, everything, Prometheus. I mean, there's so much that kind of fits into this idea. One of my favorite ideas of what the actual phenomenon might be, going all the way back to prehistory, pre the dawn of time, is these nature spirits, these primordial nature spirits. And if I was a betting man, I'm not. I do live in Vegas, but I'm not betting on this. But if I was, my money would be on this primordial nature spirit being intertwined, like Jen said, with the fate of humans. It seems like we've been in contact with these things forever. And it seems like even in a modern age, this stuff is not going away. Absolutely wild. And like you said, James, I want to point out real quick. Jen brought up the changeling. This, in terms of what the fae folk are, you said they're, most times they're diminutive, smaller than people, but it's extremely unclear, because in the other world they have the kings and queens of the fae, and they say sometimes they're monstrous and not very Tinkerbell like you would expect, but instead very, think like a bugbear from Dungeons and Dragons, something like this, like just these monstrous type massive entities that maybe shape change to get what they want, and maybe lead people astray in the guise of a leprechaun, a brownie, Tinkerbell type entity. And that's one
Exactly.
of their things, tricking people, right? Yeah, but pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, and that makes me, of course, these shape changers, if they can also grow in size. I mean, Lovecraft, anyone? You know, Lovecraftian old ones in a way as well. Um, but yeah, I hadn't known about the angle of them being connected to fate. But if you think of so many of these encounters people have, these the Fae, or whatever they're called in that region, they seem to play by their own, or operate by their own rules. Doesn't matter what rules we have, or ways we think things should go. They sort of have their own missions and agendas, and what seems good or bad to us may not mean anything to them, which is it can be terrifying, in certain encounters I've heard. But in others, it's just like everything. It's there's a whole range of reactions people have when they encounter anything out there. So yeah, but the idea of that fate connection is really that's amazing. So Jen, I don't know
The
if
the shape shifting thing. So when you actually, if you kind of think of the broad spectrum of what is what is another 1,000 words, 1,000 names for the fairy. In fact, if you were to go onto like an AI, or if you were to Google this or anything like that, and ask it to give you, say, 1,000 names for fairy, it will give you all these different names, and they will add on a fairy queen, for example, or a sprite this, or a fairy that, or a fairy that, or this. But it basically is insinuating enchanted, and it looks as if like magical in some way. It's some type of something unnatural, like that somehow it's able to break the laws of physics of this world, or it's doing something that does that would be considered fey in a way. And these beings don't look like. Sometimes they have very distinctive descriptions for them. It depends on the territory, it seems. It depends on the culture and the people and the type of fairy that must be inhabiting that direction, because there's a very strong emphasis on the cardinal directions. And you see this with the Watchers too, and the Grigori, and that's the fallen angels, and the talk about that, which comes more out of the Middle East and everything, but in the Abrahamic religions. However, it's still interesting to note, because the lore, when you take into account things like the Fae talking about the Seelie and these courts, there was this great schism with them as well, and it was to do about how to handle mankind. So something happened where they became suddenly aware, more so, that there was some type of issue. Could it have been that mankind had developed some type of power, like you hear about Prometheus that Mike was talking about, or that man had been given, tricked or something? There's a lot to think about here, but some of them are distinctively characterized and described, and some of them have no shape at all. It can become anything. So they can look like anyone, perhaps even a relative, perhaps anyone. And there's the power of possession as well, the same as you hear about with demons. And sometimes that can grant them great powers, and sometimes it can be very negative. So it just kind of varies, the same in many cultures about many different topics. They may gain knowledge or wisdom, but then, it's creepy or something. But it's conceivable that you could have people walking around that they are these bodies, but they have been taken, and you're actually talking to one of these beings from the other world, because they're able through portals to come and go in our world. But we, for some reason, and this is why they have the wings, I think, because you see the wings depicted on the Fae a lot of times in the artwork, in the romantic period of the artwork. But you also see it on the angels, and I think that that's symbolic of being able to kind of to go across space and time in some way through these portals. Like when you talk about the fairy ring and stuff like that. And it's weird. I was thinking about this when we were talking about the connection with the AI and smart dust and fairy dust and how strange that is. And when I was looking up about fairy dust a while back now, but the first account I could find that was anything like it was Aphrodite. And this was talking about, these are the gods and goddesses, and in some accounts, the idea of their children being fae, because there's a lot of discretionary there. But anyway, there was a type of dust that she had got from grounding up the bones of doves. And it's really creepy and strange, but the dust has some kind of magical power. Could it be that a lot of our technology is either an imitation or it's the realization of their magic coming into our realm and what it looks like in the physical realm and not in this in-between world, but they're making it more tangible in a way. But they're able to take on many different forms, and because there are several different types of these beings. So the shape-shifting, and like Mike was saying, some of them are enormous, and that's the same account with the, not enormous, it's not even the right word, unimaginable. And then they can put themselves down into a minute, a very small, diminutive form if they want to, or even into the shape of a human or an animal, which is very common. But yeah, so it is just wrought with all kinds of strange, and I think it's easy to push it out of the mind unless something, I don't know, I think there's some fear I think that maybe out of fear of these beings, we have developed a modern world to keep ourselves maybe even somehow insulated, but still they have found a way to get through, perhaps with the technology, in some way or something.
Yeah, what's super odd about that is that the more I'm reading about this stuff, it seems like there's very specific and particular rules you're supposed to follow when you contact these entities. And like James was saying there, they have their different cultural norms that are very non-human. And, I said this before when we talked about it months ago, but funny to them may be dangerous to us. Like they're very unpredictable. They're very just they could hurt people and
Right.
and maybe go laugh about it some other decade away because whatever, it's like means nothing to them.
Because they're immortal, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so the weird thing is like reading a bunch about this, getting prepared for this, there seems to be like there's just this huge list of rules of like do this, don't do that, never accept a gift from them because that means now you owe them something. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these rules, and again, how do we know what's what? Because we're going off of again, firsthand accounts, in some cases folklore, in some other cases. And another one that's interesting too is I read that you should not give them your full name because it's back to that Rumpelstiltskin bit where they should refer to you as just a first name but not your full name, because once they know it, they have some other kind of influence over you. Pretty wild when you look at like I said, there's lists and lists and lists like this of things you should and should not do with the Fae folk.
Wow. Going back to the point about the division over what to do about mankind, that makes me think of one of the most common things that you hear about from people that have supposedly been contacted or abducted or but by what they think, and maybe but may not be what they think are aliens, and that is the whole nuclear situation. The idea that these different beings do not like the fact that people in this world now have this technology that could potentially just destroy everything. And I wonder if that's because it could somehow also affect them wherever they're at, whereas before there was nothing that could do that. And I wonder if it's similar to. I wonder if that has to do with that maybe is part of, or maybe even the exact thing that spawned that division. If all these beings can travel through time or even see into other times, maybe they became aware of this possibility happening at some point.
They say it's symbiotic.
Yeah.
So like all the old stories say that the connection with humans is symbiotic and that we are constantly exchanging with them. And that, I mean, if you think about the connection back to the fates and the destiny, that they are kind of the hidden hand of a lot of human events, and that a lot of the things that we are doing, when we really think about what's going on here, about what life is, and about what death is, and all these different strange things that we have no answers for, something does have the answers for it, and something is aware of it. Something else does know. And I think that they may have some answers. Now, I did say earlier they were immortal, but they aren't. I mean, they might as well be, is kind of the idea, but they change form, and so do, I think, because also the human soul, there's something to do about that. But I've heard the symbioticness of it is that they don't procreate in the same way that we do. However, they can interact with humans, and there's an ability to intermingle with humanity. So you have that. And in fact, the reason that they had this argument with the Seelie and the Unseelie court, just referring to the Fae, there was a child that was stolen, apparently, in the account that I found that was talking about this when they first, what caused the schism between these two courts, because initially they were one court. But it was over a stolen child and what to do with it. And then it was more, and then on the better spectrum. But then you think about the idea of this stolen child, but all the accounts, they're very strange beings. I mean, they do eat, but I've heard too that many of them are more like amphibians and they absorb through their skin. I thought that was all something that I'd heard, through a lot of the modern conspiracy stories. But if you go back to this manuscript that was written down in 1644, it says the exact same thing. So that they absorb their food and substance the same way, basically, as an amphibian. So, and they don't, it's strange that they can, going back to the idea that they can intermingle with humanity, and that there might be some kind of, that they cannot reproduce their own. And the idea, too, in witchcraft, when you think about Aleister Crowley and how they were creating this moonchild and the NASA stuff and everything, it's all very strange. And it's just, I don't know, I need a little guidance to not just go off into all the things, because it's so weird.
Real quick, if you guys haven't heard of this, in folklore, what they said, this changeling that Jen's talking about, is that the Fae folk would often steal a human child and replace it with one of their own, and known as a changeling. The changeling, of course, would appear as the human child at first glance, but would be sickly, misbehaved, or otherwise abnormal. And the idea was that the Fae would take a healthy human child and leave behind a sickly or malformed child as a way of protecting their own children from harm. And so goes back to that Rumpelstiltskin bit, right? You're firstborn and all the rest of that stuff. And I mean, it seems like this is very, very linked with the old stealing the babies. Like, don't steal the babies in the middle of the night, because things get weird.
And they're afraid of the industrialization, yet, they were afraid of iron, and there's a lot of mythos about that. However, I don't know. It's interesting, though, if they are trying to, because when you take into account the idea of the Seelie and the Unseelie, and you have the Archons and the Fallen Angel and all this stuff, that you have one group that is trying to help and is benevolent towards mankind, and one that is totally malicious and gets a kick out of causing trouble and destruction. But this is a super intelligence. I mean, you're talking about something, I guess it's absurd. I mean, the references to where they get this from, where people in the old world got this from even, except that there are accounts that they were here, that the stories have been handed down, and you're talking about, and even in some accounts are called the ancestors, that's been, the old ones, the idea of that. But there's some memory, maybe it's some type of genetic memory even, that tells people that there's there was something, you know, I don't know, that was living before, that the world was different, much, much different at some time. And then you have the idea of even that other world thing, that they might even be subterranean or up in outer space or something. And that's it's just strange to think about where the location would be. Because they say it's right here, yet it's not, you know. So I don't know what to make of it.
Through the veil.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, go ahead, James.
Yeah. The other world aspect of it to me is amazing, because I remember one of the things I saw, it mentioned that all the Fae live there, but also just other beings, other similar beings, and even gods. And I wonder what, are those just greater, more powerful Fae, or are they actually talking about? This is where it gets tricky, is trying to figure out all the different sort of kinds of entities that are out there, because there's so much overlap in things that people report in terms of what they see or hear and what they experience. And then I've talked about this before, the whole thing with lights, people seeing lights everywhere. You see them in the forest. And the people say it's a nature spirit of some kind. You see one in your house, it's a ghost. You see one out in space or in the sky, it's a UFO. But if it's all similar lights, then we really have no idea what they are. And
Right.
I don't think it's any one thing. So just the idea of lights and shadows even appearing and disappearing and flying around, moving around in different ways. I wonder if in some cases people, when they're seeing those things, I wonder if they're just barely sensing that, a Fae of some kind. They're not really seeing it how it really is. They're just picking up on it slightly.
Yeah, real quick on that. So the lights in the sky and wherever they happen to be, whether it's in the house or in nature, I came across exactly that thing when talking about them being mischievous and trying to lead people into danger. The will-o'-the-wisp is what this is known as. And they say that the Fae folk conjure these things, these lights out there in the darkness for people to follow, and then they'll lead them into the swamp or something, or some dangerous place where they should not go. And they're just chasing sort of these lights that aren't necessarily the Fae themselves, but conjured by them as some sort of, for lack of a better term, the shiny object to follow. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah, and they
That,
feed on it too. Like a lot of the fear and stuff like that. The Unseelie Court, anyway, if you look up the mythos on them, a lot of what we talk about, a lot of the stuff you hear about in the conspiracy stuff today that's designed to just, scare the jeepers out of people, is based on a lot of this old lore where they are living like the Unseelie Court, these bad ones, because there's always that. There's these bad ones. They is some kind of symbiotic relationship where they are feeding off the negative energy of people. So, and why that would be, that's not, there's no way to really know. I mean, you'd have to really, it might just be a personal thing to even figure it out. But I think the changeling thing is really strange too. Because, this replicating of oneself and the doppelganger idea, which if Mike's talked, he's done some great shows on that. The idea that you have this, I came across a lot of that, like where you have another walker, like another one that walks with you in a way, and then you have the astral projection thing. That those are also too located. That this version of yourself is located in this other world too, in the Fey realm, and so they can take on even your own appearance in a way. So there's this strange. It's just like there is like a mirror world. Like when you think about like Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, they're talking about a lot of this stuff. And in fact, this reminds me a lot of in Game of Thrones, how the children, the children of the forest, that they created the White Walkers in Game of Thrones. I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan. But like even that type of thing, which I mean, if anybody watches that, I don't know. But the idea that there
Hell
could
yeah,
be
we do.
yeah, I hope so. But like, there's the idea that there's a possibility that these beings could have even created this technology as some type of weapon or something against. Sorry, I have my window open, and people just they're way too loud and fast. But like, but yeah. So I don't know. They are interacting with us, and it's clear that they are using. They are very sophisticated. And in fact, if they are somehow, but why they'd be intertwined with destiny and fate, and what the symbiotic relationship is with humans, what they are giving us and what we are giving. I think what we are giving them is what baffles me the most is what. But then you talk about the children thing and the feeding off this and that and everything. And you start to kind of, I don't know. You start to kind of wonder what is
or
exactly
leading us into danger, this type of thing. So some of the other things with that will o' the wisp too, real back to that real quick, is that it seems like not just leading us into something like the swamp, that was my first example, but there's other ones, those fairy rings that they say are portals. And if you shouldn't get caught in a fairy ring. So again, going through some of the rules of engagement when it comes to the fae folk and from folklore, they say that if you hear music, don't follow the music. If you see a light, don't follow the light, because what they're trying to do is draw you into something that's funny for them or dangerous for yourself or both, or even sort of like the Alice in Wonderland situation where they walk you into a fairy ring and maybe you become lost, very missing 411 style into the fairy realm, which if you want to talk about terrifying, that's a pretty wild one right there. Imagine through the looking glass into the other world.
Well, and then people are searching for you. I've heard stories of this. People can be searching for you, and you can be in the woods somewhere, and you can be calling out to them or even see them looking for you. And you can be calling back and waving your hands at them saying, hey, I'm right here. I'm right here. And they don't see or hear you until something changes. You either are able to finally move out of there, or the let's say whatever, the fae or whatever is out there decides, okay, never mind this one. It's too late. And they sort of withdraw back into their realm or their space, and then boom, everyone can see each other again and hear each other again, and they the person is safe. But for a little while there, there's so many stories of that. I could see the people and I could hear the people, but they could not see or hear me.
like time dilation stuff where they're missing time. You have that alien abduction, and you have that with the fairy too. And when Mike mentioned the music thing, it made me think of, I was thinking, when I was doing some research to talk about this, I know a lot about it just from since just always liking it. But I was like, there's some things though that I've never actually wondered about. And one of them was what kind of language they would have. And the music thing, a lot of times their language sounds like music, it says. And then also, too, that they speak through what sounds like whistling or clicking and things like that, which is strange because I've heard that with shadow people. Not the whistling, although I have heard whistling in one of my own personal accounts doing a paranormal investigation where I heard whistling in a house, but where there was no one. But that they speak in whistling, which is strange because it reminds me of the way that birds might sound. So you may even hear like bird song. But it actually, and then I've heard accounts when people are in the forest, they'll hear bird song and then nothing at all. Or there was no bird sound suddenly. What if it was them talking and then they stop abruptly because they're fixing to do something? Because they sound like whistling, some of them, when they talk. So I thought that was really strange.
That's an amazing idea because you hear that so much. People say I was in this one space and then everything out here in nature got quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that makes you wonder. And then so many times with that, there's usually something else that happens, whether it's a Bigfoot or some other kind of creature. And if they can shapeshift, I mean, who's to say they can't shapeshift into Bigfoot when they want to?
Yeah. In fact, there are accounts of them being, hairy. Some of them, because they'll take this because they are because you have like I said, so many different kinds, they say. But
The
the time
bugbear.
dilation thing is super weird. Yeah.
Yeah, the bugbear is very Bigfoot. If you don't know what a bugbear is from D&D, it is actually based on a shape changed fae, and it's monstrous. It's like 7 foot tall, covered in hair. It's very Bigfootish, and it is associated with exactly this what we're talking about. Pretty wild.
Yeah. The time thing is really weird. How they can bend time and put the person back. Sometimes they put them in the wrong place, is what I've heard too. So you have, but the way that they get that right or mess it up, the light, and that you hear in a lot of alien and abduction, they talk about things like, you know, when they're channeling or something like that, they'll say things like, "Oh, we're from so many 100 light years away." Well, that's like, a light year. I don't know what the exact number is, but a light year is like, a trillion, so many trillion of miles away. And the concept of this, that they are moving, but it's interesting about the light, and I don't know if they are, I don't know. Because, over the rainbow too, the idea of that, like in Scandinavian, they have the lore there where they talk a lot about that this fairy realm is in the sky. It sounds like over the rainbow, that kind of talk, and you hear a lot of that in fairy tales and things. But you also have the subterranean world, and this has been something that has really, really captured my mind about this, is that, you know, you hear about paradise being under your feet, and you hear about Hades being up in space, and you hear the reverse of that, and people talk a lot of times about the spheres and the planets. And considering that most of the I mean, many of the planets are they're gaseous and they're not even made of any type of substance. So what would be inhabiting that, I wouldn't know. The same thing with a lot of, the suns and things like that. What would be inhabiting those locations? Because we only have so many terrestrial planets, and this one being the ideal one. But that, it goes back into the underworld thing, and I don't know, the whole shape of the universe as we know it, and what we're actually looking here, and that we just, even though they explain it to us with so much science, we just cannot even begin to fathom what kind of strange wonder it is that we're actually existing in and among and with, especially when you take into account our own mortality and where we come from when we're born, like where the I don't know. It's just interesting, and then you tie into that the supernatural aspect of it, and then the genius of it with the demon and the where the intelligence comes from, like the radio waves of the mind, and the idea of them speaking with us, you know, because apparently they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a quick search here while you were talking about the music, and I had not heard that. I thought that the music was sort of just a trap, a trick, and it turns out, as usual, Jen is spot on here. It says they speak in riddles, metaphors, nonverbal forms of communication, gestures, music, things like this. Even archaic speech in terms of, like they're out of time, like they stepped into our world from like the 12th century or something. Wouldn't that be bizarre?
And telepathy, yeah. So like all of those ways. So I don't know. Projecting, I mean, images into our minds. They'd be capable of that, I would assume. Which is interesting when you think about our modern day technology. That it's all about that. The communication when we're even the technology of writing. And when I talk about technology, I mean like all types of technology, like writing, fire is a technology, things like that.
Yeah.
But even writing, if it was given to us as a gift, if if language or, because they supposedly, I mean, even though they have these archaic ways, like I say again, it's important to remember that these beings, when they describe when people talk about this and all of the lore, and there are many people well known to most listeners, like many poets and many historians and very serious scientific people who have talked about the stories anyway of these beings and done a lot of critique on it. And across the board, that these beings are more intelligent than humans. But, they say. And because of, I guess, because of the quality of them, that they are, like again, that they are somehow immortal. But so when we're thinking about things like, oh, they speak through whistling and music. It doesn't sound like, I don't know what you'd expect, but it is the highest technology in a way, the sound waves and everything, and how they would utilize them to affect the mind on the most. Because even a lot of the technology they do in the CIA and everything, when they did a lot of the research for doing a lot of the experiments to try and understand how the mind works and how you would manipulate that, they began to implement. If you've ever listened to a lot of the sound tones that they use to stimulate certain parts of the brain, they do. It's a high pitched sound, and some sounds you can't even hear at all because they're beyond the spectrum for the ear to hear. But these beings could be communicating on that level, even with those types of pitches, I think. And that might be the speaking, and then the telepathy. They could be communicating that way, and it would be considered extraterrestrial. It would be considered alien.
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
the aliens. Go ahead, James.
That's
Well, I don't
just-
mean to, but just because
No,
they're
just-
similar.
Oh yeah, no, I have no problem with connecting all the dots that we can in these shows. If it seems like it might there might be something there. So,
Well,
but
people would call them. They would call them aliens because they're
yeah,
because they're weird.
yep, yeah, and I mean, just think of the number of kinds of aliens that people claim to see. Again, shape-shifting. Who knows? But the music, to me, that's an amazing aspect of all that because that is something, especially if it's more just tones and not exactly. If you have just tones, but you take out any kind of words, as far as people understand them, then that's almost like a universal type of, or could be a universal kind of language. Especially if you can get certain emotions or reactions based on the tones, then that's using tones. That's not using beautiful or terrible words. That's just using frequencies and directing them at the person. So and yeah, so that's a kind of technology that I think that it's funny how modern technology seems to emulate things that we've heard about in the past that people or other beings could do before.
Yeah, and to the aliens, real quick, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. If you guys have ever seen that old Spielberg movie from the '80s or early '80s, there, and what were they doing? They were communicating mathematically with the aliens from another world, and they were using musical notes. So again, to say that connecting the two ideas seems ridiculous, it's not at all. I mean, because we talk about aliens from Alpha Centauri or whatever, but then from somewhere out there. But again, what about the dimensional aspect of somewhere right here? And I think when you kind of start looking at all these stories, there's a lot in common, regardless of what you name the entity. It just seems like we're maybe dealing with all this stuff in a blender, and maybe it's all the same thing. Maybe forever it's all been the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
That also reminds me. I don't know if either of you ever saw this. When I was a kid, I saw it, so maybe that's why I thought it was such a good movie at the time. It was that He-Man movie, that He-Man Masters of the Universe. But all their like portal technology, or their teleporting technology, was also based on sound, on different notes, and they actually had to like. Part of why they were on Earth was because they were looking for like a certain frequency to get off of Earth again, and it was like I think it was like an '80s movie as well, and so they ended up having to find a musician that could get just the right notes that they needed for when they had to get out of there.
Nice.
That's
So that
Go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, just the idea that, so why in the very beginning, why were they here and then pushed out? Because you have a lot of that talk that they were here and that mankind was, because you have the accounts of the wars with the giants and they found some and the Smithsonian covering it up and that those were physical. And you have, I think it was Abraham Lincoln. He gave some kind of speech at Niagara Falls. I can't remember the speech, like I don't know, but and you won't be able to like pin it down right away. But he did. He gave a speech at Niagara Falls. Abraham Lincoln did, and he talked about the giants, and that the giants that were buried in the hills of North America, for example, but all over the world, because you have the one in what was that one where the military ran into it in the Middle East or something? Kandahar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have the accounts of this, but the idea that the world and that the Fomerians, pardon me, the Fomerians in Irish lore were these beings that walked right out of the ocean. They were, or just came right up without boats at all. And sometimes they did, later on they had boats. But the first accounts of them are that they kind of just came and they were covered, they were terrible to look at because they'd been in the water. And they were enormous and terrifying. And some of them were missing eyes or limbs and things like that because they'd crossed the ocean, but they were enormous. You're talking like, they're really giants, like 30 feet, 60 feet, like enormous, ridiculous, absurd. But you have these accounts. And if you think about what the world was looking like, and that we talk about the different eras of the earth, because I'm always trying to be, I don't like my fairy tales to be just fairy tales. I want to believe and find out why it could be true. And in this instance, I think of things like the prehistoric times and the Jurassic era and the first accounts of mankind and where they originated and what time period they would have appeared. And they weren't appearing during the Jurassic period. You know, the first evolutions, if you were to take that route with it. But where these beings might have been, and if you think about the atmosphere of the Earth and how that had to change, and that the Earth has been always evolving, and in fact you have the idea of the continental drift and all of that stuff, but that these beings could have been inhabiting the Earth at a time, like I was thinking that it's possible, that these beings, some of them did have bodies, and I actually, kind of side note, I've heard that there was a mythos that was talking about some of these items appearing from this other world because the world itself was shifting, that our world was shifting from one world into a new world, and that new world was going to be eventually taking over. Kind of like the evolution of the Earth as it goes through a different Mesomeric or pre-Jurassic, and all the ones, all the paleontology, geologist lists. Anyway, as the Earth is shifting through all these different eras, epochs of time, it changed the weight of things and the gravity of things and the atmosphere and, the way that matter was coming together and everything. All the like the natural laws of physics for the Earth. And that these beings could have been existing at that time when there was that shift happening and they kind of faded out. The idea that could be, but they were still existing, that they're still somehow paralleling with us. Like, for example, if you were to come across an object from this world in the past, for example, something the size of a coin, but no one can lift it because somehow the laws of the physics of where it came from and how they interact with this realm are different. So if you think about these beings and how could it be true that this other world is there, not just in the imagination and in the lore, but could it be true? I think it could be if you think about the idea that these beings were never really alive and they aren't really dead. It really ties into that purgatory, too, that people talk about in the mythos of Christianity. That it's a land of not living, not dead in this other world. And that would be the same thing. Somehow just some type of intelligence that is incredibly intelligent, that's behind again, going back to the fairy, the elements of nature, and that they have some type of the strong connection with them and how they are able to affect nature. That unique relationship, when you talk about fairy, you don't hear a lot in, for example, the jinn or the fallen angels or the archons. They're more concerned with people. But the fairy are too, that they are associated with the destiny of people. So there's this strange thing, but when you tie in the nature aspect of it and the control of nature, I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, they're like the guardians of nature in many cases. It's pretty strange. Notable too, James said early on, like how do you define these things, the Fey folk, against the concept of a god or a demigod? And I think in a lot of these stories, they are very godlike, very incredibly powerful entities that are not to be trifled with. And so once again, maybe the blender analogy works here, and maybe we are dealing with a fingernail of something quite a bit more massive in scope and let's say cosmic scope. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. You know, this is talking about objects because I'm sure we've all heard of, different objects found around the world that appear to be appear to have been there thousands or hundreds of thousands of years ago or millions or whatever that seem to be modern day objects. And I wonder if we always hear about those things and people say, how could those be there? Well, maybe they were there. Maybe they were brought there. Maybe they were from any of these beings. Maybe they brought them back there and just dropped them one day. Oh, what's this? Okay, figured it out. Then just dropped it, and
Right.
then it's and then people find it in our times, and they're trying to figure out how these things can be there.
Yeah, I've heard they built things. Like you have the Cyclops, Cyclops, or how you pronounce it, because they pronounce it a little different, but the Cyclops that he built, one of those monuments. I don't have anything in front of me to look at to do for reference, because I'm just on my phone, but the idea that these beings built things, that the Cyclops built that structure, my gosh, it starts with an M. It's not coming to me, but I've also heard too that the fairy were responsible for building some of the cathedrals, which doesn't make any sense, but they were actually employed. If we're being honest about the fairy lore stuff, the old world, and I'm talking about the 1600s, the 1500s, the 17th century, they talked a great deal about these beings as if they were truly ancestors in some way. And in this account, that dwarves essentially kind of built some of the cathedrals and some of the older cathedrals that may not even be, I don't know if they're still standing or not. I can't remember what the reference was at that point. But these beings that they built, that they had this incredible craftsmanship, and also too in a lot of this fairy lore, the fairy and the traditional superstitious lore, some of these fairies can do the work of 40 men overnight. And you hear that a lot in a lot of the fairy tales, that they have some type of uncanny ability in craftsmanship. And that goes back to a lot of Tolkien, for example, in his stories, that the way that the craftsmanship and that you hear about with the dwarves and the elves and how this crafting of things being attributed to the Fae, that it's almost otherworldly. And the idea of a lot of weapons. For example, I've heard that in the old world, some people, the swords could speak. In the case of the Fomerians in the Celtic mythologies, they talk about talking swords. In fact, one of the Fomerians' swords, it spoke. When he unsheathed it, it spoke and it talked about everyone that had killed in battle. And people say, is this literal? And unlikely, you'd think, unlikely. But they say that in the old world, magic like that was commonplace, and that swords could talk, and levitation was possible, and things like that would happen. Like I said, that the world was different somehow, and that something happened, and all of that changed. Kind of like the idea of the day that Pan died or something like that. But it was by some type of enchantment that many of these things were happening. And it could just be all fairy tales, but we don't know because they took it awfully seriously when they discussed these things. Like, for example, Solomon's temple was built by demons. That's taken seriously. And I think that there is something, that they are akin in some way, and that there could be something to it. And the only way there could be something to it is that the world somehow was, that it acted different 6,000 or maybe even just a couple of thousand years ago, but we wouldn't know because the history is controlled very carefully.
Yeah, that makes me think of just, I mean, pick your ancient monument that to this day no one knows how it was built. There may be theories about different places over in South America, or, I mean, the obvious one is the Egyptian, pyramids and all those things. But if there was a point in the past, wherever that point was, where the laws of physics and reality were different, then it seems like maybe that would make it easier for those kinds of buildings to be constructed. Also, for other objects that people still find today, like giant spheres or even rock spheres or rock heads or any of those objects that are found buried underground, and then when they're unearthed, they just weigh tons. And it's like how was that made and how did that get here? So, um, that's a connection I hadn't thought of before, but that's a amazing idea, a concept of maybe the reason why that kind of stuff isn't still being built all the time is because the world changed literally in a way to where that can't be built in the same way anymore.
Yeah, I think in those terms, like if you look at the footage, no matter what you believe about the moon, whether we've been there or not, all the rest of that stuff, like that's a whole different conversation. But you see that low gravity situation happening. So it makes me wonder if, 1 million years ago or 10 million years ago or a billion years ago, that maybe there was a situation like that here on Earth, which would allow maybe things like this to function, to happen. And again, back to like Jen was saying with the items that or seem to be small, like a coin that you just can't pick up because they're otherworldly. They're from some other space in which that would be nothing to pick up. But here, it's very stuck, very Thor's hammer, very sword in the stone. You just can't remove it unless you have the right magic, and that's probably a good way to put that.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead, Jen.
I think, when people are thinking about if they want to interact with them. So you have because people would want to, I'm just thinking about the people listening, if they were thinking about, oh, would I want to interact with a fairy, or how would I repel them if they were giving me trouble, because they do, like in the lore, so I don't know if it's actually something, because by all assumptions, they're not real, by all assumption. But if a person was interested in it, I think a lot of the lore about that is interesting. Like, for example, how they're afraid of they're afraid of the power of mankind too. Like, I think that somehow the imagination of mankind is some type of weapon. I think that somehow humanity, through their own uniqueness, has the ability to either redeem these beings or to destroy them simply by the attention or lack of it that is given to them. Because I think it's interesting that mankind is prone to, when something has reached a zenith, they move on. So in the case for the gods and everything and throughout history, once they reach a certain time, it is time to move on to a new god. And that happens over and over and over again, as we have seen. Even though the story stays the same and the meaning stays the same for the psyche of mankind. With these beings, there's some type of connection there, I think, and I think that they are afraid a lot of times about how it's possible that we do affect them through the way that we imagine them. Like, for example, that we could turn them into demons through the way that we perceive what we used to cherish about them. There's a strange thing that's happening there. But that they themselves could, through that belief, become demons, become malevolent and evil. It's conceivable, just through our actions and how we treat them. But it's strange to think about. And then you think about the ones who are more benevolent, who do things for mankind. But the trickery of it and how very dangerous it is, because what they're wanting from mankind is the greater question. Because it seems like, I don't know, there's something it seems dangerous, doesn't it? So I don't know, but yeah, I don't know what they're wanting.
I think that's
if they're real.
Yeah, and I think that's a good question to leave off on, I would say, for this time. So, I think we'll end it here for today, and have to do this again sometime. Thank you both for being on. Jen, if you want to mention your channel at all, I'll, of course, include the link to it on the show description.
Oh, you can just find it on YouTube. It's just under my name, but I mean, I'll change it and make something unique so people can find. I don't know. I don't really. I could put a link somewhere for it or something, but I've kind of taken a hiatus from my channel, but I'll probably start it back up again here shortly or something. I'm usually on Troubled Minds on here with listening to James or something, but yeah, James, I really enjoyed just kind of visiting with you and Mike about this. I really enjoyed it.
No, thank you for being here, and yeah, definitely still. I'll include the link just because there's a lot of great stuff on Jen's channel already, and look forward
Eh,
to whenever you're able to start back up again. But of course, I know you gotta do what you gotta do. So breaks are fine, you know. So yeah, thank you, Jen and Mike. If you want to talk about that show called Troubled Minds, is it? I think.
I think it's called Troubled Minds. To Jen, real quick too. Had a good time. I appreciate it very much. Thanks to both you and James for again peeling out the time and doing this, because this is fun to kind of just formatless get together and talk about amazing things. So I appreciate it very much.
yeah,
I
and
got a show called. Go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry. No, I was going to say your perspective on this, because I never ever would have thought ever about the AI aspects of this. And I never even, and I think that tying in the technology today is key to understand and where the world is going. And you cover this so often, not just the AI, but all the things because the things that you talk about in your show they follow such a unique path that but it allows a person to see that might be thinking about a lot of this old lore, that there could be some type of correlation even in the modern world today. And this is a lot of representation of how it is still present, how that magic that is so strange and bizarre is still presenting in the modern world. And so, yeah, I was really happy to have the opportunity to visit with you on here about it with James.
Amen, 100%. And I think that's the thing. Like, we should consider all those possibilities as part of this, because you just never know if there's something out there that's not quite, let's say, earthbound. Then how would this entity or entities communicate with us? And I think technology and just that, speed of light type stuff, and just the way physics as we know them in the quantum world. I mean, it just gets spooky. It just gets spooky the more you think about it. So yeah, had a blast. So thank you again. And Troubled Minds, 7 p.m. Pacific. By the way, it's official. We've got a Troubled Minds radio network coming. So that's already in like a soft launch. And yeah, just getting ready to go. We're going to be back in probably 2 weeks, first week of April, and having a break is good. Thanks for having me, James.
No problem. And I just hopefully it's okay to say that you may hear a familiar show on that network at some point. So
Yes,
um,
indeed.
yeah,
Already in the works. It starts
yeah,
with an S.
yeah.
It rhymes with no, never mind. I
Oh,
think you can get the idea.
yeah. I don't think it rhymes with anything, but that's funny. Yeah, no.
That,
Looking
that's why I
forward to being in.
froze. I'm like,
Yeah,
damn, there's no good.
Salcedo. No, but yeah, thank you, and yeah, looking forward to being on the network with you, and just calling into your shows again as well is always fun. So thank you both,
You guys,
and
you guys rock. Have a great night.
you as
You
well.
too.
Both of you take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
And so with that, I will be back on Saturday night, Sunday morning, to cover, to share true paranormal stories from the web on the next episode of Salcedo Paranormal. Thank you all for listening, and take care.